Hello everyone, today we will be talking about some basic endgame checkmates that you must know. We will be learning how to checkmate with a rook, a queen, and with 2 rooks. Learning these checkmates is extremely important because you want to be able to close out your games. The worst thing that can happen is outplaying your opponent for the whole match, but not being able to convert into a win at the end. So let's get started. The first checkmate we will be learning is the rook versus the king checkmate. Your goal in this is to continuously back the enemy king into a corner by cutting off his escape squares with your rook and your king. We also want to push our king gradually forward toward that corner as the enemy king backs away into that corner. To demonstrate, here in this position, I would like to get the enemy king to the h8 corner because right now it's closest to that corner. To start, I will move my rook to e1, and by doing so, I'm restricting the black king. As you can see, black can no longer move toward the left because my rook is controlling these squares, so he's being gradually inclined to move toward the h8 corner square. If he tries to move up, I want to keep my rook on the e-file to continue restricting the black king, so I should move my king. But the question is where? I should move my king to g3, because if I move my king to e2 or e3 here, I would be blocking my rook from controlling the e-file, and black would be no longer restricted, and he could freely move toward the center. And I want him to move toward the corner, so this is not a good idea. Therefore, I should move my king to g3, and if black moves to g5, I can continue to restrict him with my rook by moving to f1. And this once again keeps restricting black, and it forces him to move gradually toward the h8 corner, which I want. Black is forced to move backwards, and as he does, I want to move my king forwards toward the corner square, because that's part of our strategy. And slowly, black gets forced into the h8 corner, and since now he's here, I can move my rook to f8 and checkmate black. A queen checkmate is similar to a rook checkmate in that you want to cut off your enemy king and want to force him to a corner. In this position, I can accomplish this by moving my queen to d4. As you can see, I'm not only checking the black king, but I'm restricting the squares he can go to. He can't move to the right to d5 or d6 because my queen is controlling these squares. And he can't move forward to b4 or c4 because my queen is also controlling these squares. So, in this position, he's forced to move backwards, slowly toward the a8 corner where I want him to be. If he moves to c6, I can move my king to c4. And once again, I'm restricting his squares. He can't move forward to b5 because my king controls that square. And he can't move towards b6, c5, d5, or d6 because my queen is controlling these squares. So I'm slowly dominating him and forcing him to continually move backwards. He's forced to move backwards, and my king moves forwards because remember, we also want our king to move toward the corner that we want our enemy king to go into, because our king will be supporting our queen when we checkmate him. So, black is again forced to move toward this corner again, because we are restricting him and he has no other moves. And now, we have an important check. We can move our queen to d7 and check the black king. And now, he's forced to move toward b8 or a8. And as you can see, our moves have been gradually forcing him to move toward this a corner, We've been restricting his squares, and each time he has no other choice but to move back. And this is what we have accomplished. We have gotten his king to the corner, and now that he's in the corner, we can successfully checkmate him. Let's solve some puzzles now. First, let's review our strategy when checkmating with either a rook or a queen. Pause the video and try to remember what we need to do in order to checkmate our enemy. I will give the solution in 3 seconds. Our goal is to slowly push our opponent to one of the 4 corners on the board, so either the A1, H1, H8, or A8 corners. And we do this by using our rook or our queen to cut off the squares that our enemy king would like to run to, gradually pushing him to the corner. And as our enemy king is being driven into one of these corners, we want to move our king forward to that corner as well. And when our enemy is finally in one of those corners, we can checkmate him. And we want to push our opponent into a corner because it's the only way we can checkmate him. It's impossible to checkmate him in the center, so we must gradually push him toward the corner to checkmate him. Next, let's try to solve this puzzle and come up with the best moves for white. Pause the video and I will reveal the solution in 3 seconds. Here, we are very close to backing the black king to the A1 corner. By moving our rook to F7 and checking the black king, he's forced to move backwards because our king on G5 is preventing him from moving forwards. So this check on F7 is forcing him to move closer and closer to the corner. If he moves to B1, we can bring our king closer to the A1 corner by moving to B3. And this not only brings our king closer, but also protects the rook on F7. So here, black is forced to move to the corner on A1 because our rook and our king is restricting his other squares. And now that black is finally in the corner, we can checkmate him with rook C1. For this problem, pause the video and try to figure out the best moves for white again. I will reveal the solution in 3 seconds. Here, the black king is close to the H1 corner. If we move our king to G3, we accomplish 2 things at once. First, we move our king closer to the H1 corner where we want to trap the black king. Also, this move frees up our queen as our king is no longer blocking it. It has full range and is controlling the F file, as you can see. And this restricts black's moves. He can no longer move to the left to F1 because our queen is controlling that square. So he's being restricted and he is only allowed to move to the H1 corner. And now that he's in the H1 corner, we can checkmate him by moving our queen to F1. Let's move on to the double rook checkmate now. In this checkmate, we want to use both rooks to keep pushing the enemy king to a back rank. One rook cuts off the king from running away, while the other rook checks the enemy king. Let's look at an example of this. Here, let's move our H1 rook to H4, checking the black king on D4. The black king can only move backwards to any of these 3 squares because he can't move forwards due to our rook on G3 cutting off his squares. If he moves to E5, we should continue this method by moving our G3 rook to G5 to check. We should use this rook because moving our H4 rook to H5 is a bad idea. We are no longer cutting black off from moving forward, so he can move to E4. Using the G3 rook is correct because our rook on H4 is restricting black from moving forwards. So here, black is once again forced to move backwards. if black moves to f6, we should transfer our rooks to the other side of the board. Whenever the black king gets too close to our two rooks, we want the rooks to move to the opposite side of the board and out of danger from the black king. So here, we want to move our h4 rook to the other side of the board. And black will no longer be attacking any of our two rooks. So now we can continue our plan by having one rook cut off black from escaping and the other rook by checking him. As you can see, every time we have one rook that's cutting off black's escape squares, while the other rook is checking the black king and forcing him to continually move backwards. And at a point, black will eventually not be able to move backwards, and we will be able to checkmate him. Let's look at a puzzle to review this concept. Pause the video and try to figure out the best moves for white. I will reveal the solution in 3 seconds. We will continue our strategy of having one rook cut off black's escape squares and the other rook checking him. So we can move our rook on a5 to a7 to check, since our h6 rook is cutting off black from moving to the 6th rank. Here, black can only move backwards, because once again, he can't move forwards to any of these 3 squares, because the rook on h6 is controlling them, and that would be an illegal move. So black is forced to move to g8. And now, black is close to our h6 rook, so we can't move to h8 because he can just take. So remember, every time the black king gets too close to our rooks, we want to move them to the other side of the board. And we can do this by moving it to b6. And on the next move, we can checkmate black. And once again, we are having one rook cutting off the escape squares and the other rook checking. And that's the main strategy behind the 2-rook checkmate. Congratulations for solving all these puzzles. Thank you for watching.